Greetings and welcome to everyone. And I pray that this time of sharing our minds would be a source of enrichment for all of us, including me. I want to acknowledge that your presence with me, though invisible, in this space, cyberspace, is a source of encouragement as well as enrichment for me. And I really thank each one of you for the interest that you take in this as well as the feedbacks that you care to provide. In this particular session, let's look at an interesting phenomenon pertaining to religion. The purpose of religion is to make us better human beings. Of that, there is no doubt. And there is also no doubt that the scale of religious activities has increased and is still increasing. In fact, there are more religious programs, activities, initiatives, even resources today than was available, say, 200 years ago. And yet, the human stock or the quality and stature of being human is dwindling. Surely this is a very strange thing. This is an anomaly for which there must be some explanation. I have been pondering over this. I have been looking for a satisfactory, rational, as well as scripturally sound explanation for this very strange and anomalous situation. And I think I have now started seeing light at the end of the tunnel, and that's what I propose to share with you. Let's proceed with our meditation right away. As guiding text for our meditation, let me read a verse from the 9th chapter of the Gospel according to St. Matthew, verse 36, which reads as follows. When Jesus saw the crowds, he had compassion for them because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. Jesus' focus is on the plight of the people. On the one hand, he saw then, as we see now, a massive religious establishment. The Judaic establishment was perhaps easily the most competently, tightly organized, authoritarian religious establishment anywhere in the world at that time. Religion was the center of the people. The Jews could not imagine a life or even a country without their religion. In Judaism, politics and religion fused. Nation and the will of God became one. Religion was everywhere. It touched every aspect of their life. The priests had their stranglehold on every aspect of the life of the people. And they adhered strictly to the priestly prescriptions through which they understood the spiritual tradition to which they belonged. But the end product of all this massive effort was this very pathetic reality. The people were like sheep without a shepherd. Now, what a comprehensive description of the utter helplessness, impoverishment, and spiritual bewilderment or directionlessness in which people languished in those days. And it says very clearly here that Jesus, seeing this plight of the people, had compassion on them. There is no evidence anywhere in the four Gospels either that the priestly class of the days was conscious of this miserable plight of the people, or that if anyone among them was aware of this, he felt any extent of compassion for the plight of the people. It is completely absent from this Gospel narrative. You can check the four Gospels and you will certainly agree with what I'm saying. And here is Jesus, who is not part of the established religion, who is an outsider, as it were, feeling compassion for the people, for everyone who is part of this huge religious enterprise, but whose life is getting degraded day by day. Let's take another example, chapter 4 of John's Gospel. There Jesus has an encounter with a woman from Samaria. And Jesus initiates a conversation, as it turns out, on purpose, because he senses in advance that the plight of the woman was miserable, was pathetic, or in fact, borrowing the words from this description, we might say she was like sheep without a shepherd. But being a Samaritan woman, belonging to the Samaritan culture, the Samaritan sect as it were, she was extremely proud of the religious tradition, and it's with heart swelling with pride that she says, our fathers worship on that mountain, whereas you Jews worship on some other mountain. So she didn't lack religiosity. In fact, she didn't lack religious zeal. I'm sure she adhered strictly to all the religious prescriptions and practices of her days. But what was her plight? Is very briefly, crisply, and sufficiently put in the text. 5 husbands you have had already. The one you are living with is not your husband. In other words, her personal life was getting degraded and cheapened day by day, and completely impervious to all of this. The act of worship was taking place at a safe distance atop Mount Gerizim, and the religious establishment was flourishing even as people were languishing and dwindling. This is the reality, and that reality you will find if you are bold enough to recognize the truth in the midst of which you live. The same thing happens or exists today, except that it is a little more acute. It is so acute today that really nobody believes that religion is meant for the ennoblement of the essence of humanity. Religion is meant to make us better human beings. And this particular goal, which is extremely valuable upon this earth, is substituted very cleverly with another goal, namely improving the eligibility criteria or parameters of individual believers so that they can be assured of a safe place in heaven. So what happens to life upon this earth is nobody's concern. You can live like sheep without a shepherd here, and you're assured of some kind of compensation in the world to come. And that's the kind of religiosity that sells readily in our times for the simple reason that that's the popular idea of religion, and the people know nothing better, and therefore people accept this as the given and life goes on. But unfortunately, the terrible consequence of this is everywhere to be seen. Human beings are dwindling in their stature, the quality of being human is being degraded, and there is an overall sense of decay and devaluation. And this is a reality that cannot be glossed over or overlooked from a spiritual point of view. And the difference between Jesus and the priestly class of his days was that this was not a concern to the priest, but this was a prime concern for Jesus, and that in itself demonstrates the difference between religion and spirituality. Now, this is what we are now trying to understand. And I'm going to provide a perspective, because understanding, if you know anything about literary theory or even cognitive theories in psychology, understanding is largely a matter of perspective. We must develop a perspective in order to understand the given situation. Now, why is it that there is this marked difference between the priestly class on the one hand and Jesus on the other? Now, to understand this clearly, it's wiser to look away from this and look at a parallel situation which is purely secular. Now, let me take the domain of medicine, because this is a non-controversial domain, and I can therefore make observations on this domain without raising anybody's hackles, and that could facilitate objective, serene, non-controversial thinking with open minds, which is what I appeal for. Now, in the sphere of medicine, there are two completely different paradigms. There is preventive medicine, there is curative medicine. Simple, preventive medicine, curative medicine. Now, of course, it is not known as preventive medicine, it's known as community medicine. Community medicine. But the idea remains the same, the idea of the preventive medicine or prophylactic medicine, if you want a slightly more complicated word for it. What's the difference between the two? While the curative medicine intervenes when people have developed various illnesses or various types of pathologies, prophylactic medicine or preventive medicine or community medicine tries to create a healthy way of life and protect people from various infections so that they don't have to fall sick. Curative medicine waits for people to fall sick so that they can be helped out of their ailment, whereas preventive medicine tries to teach people, enable people, create conditions conducive for people to develop and live a healthy way of life so that they are protected from infections, diseases, etc. Now, everyone agrees. I've done plenty of work in the medical field, though I'm not a medical man. For some very strange reason, I found myself deeply involved with medical work, medical education, medical seminars. My first book was on a medical subject. I was the first person to write a book on HIV/AIDS in Asia. So I have some familiarity with this field. That's why this illustration comes readily to mind. Now, though everyone agrees that the saner approach, the most cost-effective approach, the better approach is the approach of preventive medicine, the lion's share of all resources allocated to the sphere of medicine goes into curative medicine. Why? There's a reason for it. There's very little profit in preventive medicine or prophylactic medicine because if people do not fall ill, then what's the prestige of medical sciences? I'm reminded at this time of an observation made by Plato some 2,400 years ago in his book, classic book titled The Republic, where Plato says that doctors do not realize that they are thriving on the imperfections and the suffering of the people. Well, more to be said on that, but maybe on another occasion. The same thing can be said about teachers, about lawyers, about judges, and so on and so forth, because in a society of perfect knowledge, no teacher will have any employment. In a society that's perfect in its law and order culture, there will be no need for a lawyer or a judge. So on and so forth. So every major sector in culture thrives because of human imperfections. Now, all the profit in the practice of medicine is in the domain of curative medicine. For example, take cardiology or cardiothoracic surgery. Tell me which is more profitable. Enabling people to lead a healthy life so that they do not develop cardiac problems, or ignoring this altogether and wait for people to develop cardiac problems through unhealthy lifestyles, etc., and then intervene dramatically to save a person from the jaws of death. Now, if you spend your lifetime working to evolve and popularize a healthy way of life, and people are saved and people are able to avoid these dramatic episodes of illness, near fatal illness, nobody will recognize your work. On the other hand, you allow the society to be unhealthy, and there's a cardiac arrest and you intervene, you save that person, that people will say you are the messiah, you're the medical messiah of the people, and you will win many awards. Therefore, the profit is only in curative medicine, medical interventions after things have gone wrong. Now, if this pattern is understood, we can now understand what has gone wrong in the domain of religion. Now, if you look at the life and teachings of Jesus Christ, the mission of Jesus Christ, which comprises both his teachings and his interventions, you will find that without any doubt, Jesus' work belongs to the prophylactic mode. All his teachings pertain to developing a spiritually, socially, psychologically, even physiologically healthy way of life, so that you don't fall into this bottomless pit of frequent illness and stay in the state of helplessness. Now, obviously, of course, since he intervened at a particular point in history, he also had to respond to the illnesses of many people who were the products of the older way of life. Therefore, he responded out of compassion to the suffering of the people. But the real soul of the teaching and the intervention or the role model of Jesus Christ was to make people aware that there is a far better way of life, a healthier way of life, wherein these outbreaks of crises can be avoided and a far better quality of life can be maintained. It is in this light that you must understand Jesus' exhortation to be perfect. Be perfect even as your Father in heaven is perfect. Now, if I may rephrase it in medical terminology, I would say the injunction, I'm getting confusing medicine and religion, the injunction or the exhortation to be perfect is the exact equivalent of inoculation in medicine. Why do we inoculate ourselves? To improve our immunity so that infections are warded off and we stay healthy. We do not succumb to infections. So that is certainly a wiser option, right? Now, the exhortation to people to be perfect was never articulated by the priestly class of the times. Instead, what they did, and what priests in our times are also doing, is to make people aware all the time that they are sinful, everything is wrong with them, that they need to be cleansed, and in order to be cleansed and delivered from the fateful or terrible consequences of the wretched and sinful way of life they are leading, they need to come to the priest and to carry out certain ritualistic functions which are prescribed by the priestly class so that their sins are cleansed and they are restored back to some kind of normalcy. Now, this is a routine practice. But please understand that these practices, which are very profitable to the priestly class, stand rooted in the idea that people are sinful. And therefore, what most people don't realize is this, and I'm going to make a very important revelation: the continuing hold of the priestly class on the life of the people, the authority of the priest on the life of the people, can be perpetuated and secured only if the sinfulness of the life of the people is preserved, in fact deepened. So the idea that people can never be free from sinfulness was a dangerous idea for the priestly class, because, now let's imagine a situation of people following the instruction of Jesus Christ to be perfect. Everyone, let's assume a hypothetical, idealistic situation in which everybody heeds the advice of Jesus and genuinely, sincerely, with all the strength possible, seeks perfection, attains perfection. So now you have a perfect society. What will the priest do? In a perfect society, they're completely superfluous. They'll have to shut shop. You understand the problem? So therefore, the idea that people can be perfect, the idea that people can actually be so developed spiritually that they can become better equipped to ward off sinfulness and the aberrations that sin induces in human personality, was not a point of emphasis as far as they are concerned. In fact, the profit in practicing priesthood is derived entirely from the imperfections and the corresponding helplessness and anxieties and bewilderment of the people. And it is the byproduct of this priestly priority that attracts the attention of Jesus Christ. Therefore, Jesus sees the plight of the people in this kind of graphic description that we have in the 36th verse of the 9th chapter of Matthew's Gospel, which I've just read out to you, which is, Jesus looked at them and found that they were miserable like sheep without a shepherd. You understand? So, there is a radical difference between the religious approach, pre-centric religious approach, which mandates, which requires the perpetuation of the sinfulness of the people, And on the other hand, the spiritual approach, which is exemplified in Jesus Christ's public ministry and his person, so that people are inoculated against this vulnerability to sin, and therefore they're delivered also from their need to depend on the priestly class and priestcraft. And now in this light you can understand the true meaning of Jesus' other exhortation, which is found in the 4th verse of the 15th chapter of John's Gospel, abide in me and I in you. That's a state of perfection. There's a direct connection between Matthew chapter 5 verse 48 and John chapter 15 verse 4, that is, be perfect, Matthew chapter 5 verse 48, abide in me and I in you, John chapter 15 verse 4, the two are the same. And both together describe a situation in which priestly ministrations become completely unnecessary. It is for this reason that in the spiritual vision of Jesus Christ and Jesus' way of life, that should have been the rocky foundation for the life of Christians, there is really no obsession with sin. I challenge you to examine the 4 Gospels, the teachings of Jesus Christ, Jesus' interaction with various people. Unlike the priests of the times and unlike the priests of our times, Jesus was not sin obsessed. Yes, you might then ask me, what about Mark chapter 2, in which Jesus says to the paralytic, your sins are forgiven. But that's not because Jesus was sin obsessed. It was because he was a victim of the kind of religiosity that prevailed then. And that was what I was trying to explain to you so far, that the perpetuation of the stranglehold of priests on the life and the imagination of the people depends on the extent to which the hold of sin on them is continued. And when that process is protracted and maintained, preserved for a period of time, this is the end product of the individual person. The individual becomes a paralytic. Now, Jesus looks at the people and finds them like sheep without a shepherd. That's the people. Look at the plight of the individual. He's a paralytic confined to a bed, camp bed. Now, there's a terrible state of disempowerment. There's a caricature of being human. And Jesus is inviting us to consider the fact that this is really the outcome of depraved, dishonest, ungodly religiosity, priest-dominated religiosity, which is custom designed to secure and perpetuate the profit and control of the priestly class on the life of the people. The priestly class exists for their sake and not for the sake of the people. This is not what I am saying. If you have the courage to look at the teachings of Jesus Christ, if you have the courage to understand the spiritual vision of Jesus Christ, you will come to this conclusion and none other. I have based my thinking entirely in implicit compliance and total adherence to the teachings of Jesus Christ. I have not imported anything from my pet philosophies or ideologies. This is exactly what Jesus meant. If anyone has a different view, please let me know, but it has to be a recent, scripturally valid view, and not a view derived from some kind of parochial, sectarian angularities, some kind of traditional assertions without any logic to it, arbitrary assertions out of some kind of misguided religious zeal. So please give a thought to this. Ask yourself this question. You have practiced religion for so long. What has been its impact on you? Have you become a better human being? If you have, please go on. Practice it with redoubled vigor. I'm all for it. But there must be some factual foundation for it. I don't know what your experiences are. I have been active in the religious field for 35 years, and I tell you that I've had encounters, experiences, conversations, discussions, arguments with hundreds of priests and dozens of bishops. I've had experiences, encounters with them. I can tell you one thing without any uncertainty. The common man is spiritually far better than members of the priestly class. The common man, the ordinary believer, has the fear of God. But that is absent from the other sector. Well, I leave it to your reflection. Check what I've said against your own personal experience. If you find that there is anything in what I have said which is not in harmony with the facts of your day-to-day experience, cast out everything that I have said so far. I'll thank you for it. But if you believe that what I have said is in total conformity with the teachings of Jesus Christ and his whole approach seen right through his mission in public life, then please give this a thought. There's a radical difference between the two approaches. One is the curative approach, the other is the prophylactic approach. In the prophylactic approach, there is no concern for profit. The concern is only for the welfare of the people. Whereas in the curative approach, the obsession is only with the profit that can be raked in, and therefore very serious ethical aberrations abound in the domain of the curative medicine, whereas the preventive medicine or prophylactic medicine or community medicine is nearly free of all this. So I commend these thoughts to you and pray that you would consider them, reflect over them, mull over them without prejudices, and being sensitive to the predicament of the people, the community of believers. And to the extent that I have seen so far, their plight is miserable. And may I borrow the words from Jesus Christ, because I can't improve on them. They are like sheep without a shepherd. Thank you.